Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be exploring some haunted houses for some truly chilling experiences. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, as about 75% of you are not. So feel free to do that and click the bell for daily uploads. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My family house is over 100 years old, on an apple orchard estate. The house was abandoned and renovated in the 70s by a couple. They grew older and the wife was told she could no longer have children. Against the diagnosis of the doctors, she conceived, and the two had a daughter. But when the girl was 5 years old, she fell from a tree that is in the front yard and died on the spot. The husband became severely depressed and locked himself in the study. The study is now my younger brother's bedroom. The room went virtually unchanged from when we got possession of the house. The husband was so depressed that he hung himself from the large old tree that is in the backyard. It's dead smack in the center of the yard, and the wife moved out and sold the house after 20 years or so to my dad in 1998. Since then, it has undergone a full renovation with additions, but the study has remained the same. My dad likes it for the wood paneling walls with built-in shelves and looks very rustic. The two trees involved, the little girl's climbing tree and the hanging tree, remain where they are. The tree where the girl died is thriving and beautiful, but the father's tree is dead and ready to be cut down. Thing is, when the couple lived there, the trees were placed under law to never be cut down, so my father has no choice but to leave them standing. He says that he's afraid to cut them down anyway. He wants to remove the back one because it's a creepy eyesore straight from The Conjuring, but he is legitimately terrified that it will subsequently kill the beautiful tree in the front of the house. Here is where things get interesting. I first would like to start off by saying I know for a fact that I close more doors than I open. I have many siblings, but the door that opens most frequently is the one to my older brother's room, the prior master bedroom, when the couple owned it, which is the only room that has a view to a suicide tree. My brother lives in Boston, so he's never home, and the room is never touched and the door remains closed. Until about 3 a.m. every night when I wake up to go to the bathroom, and it's cracked open about a third of the way. This happens most nights, but isn't much of a story. The real experience is indisputable in my mind. I'm sitting in the basement watching TV in the only downstairs room, which has a door leading into the backyard where the suicide tree is. I'm alone. It's about 1 a.m. No one else is in the house, when out of nowhere I feel my head being pulled by the right ear. At first, I didn't think anything of it, since I have 4 siblings. I about died when I remembered my solitude. I snapped my head around and the sensation stopped as I observed the continued silence besides the quiet television. I wait about 30 seconds before I decide that it might be best to leave the room, when a large, old, wood-framed comfy chair cracks in half. I run the hell out of there and straight to my room on the 2nd floor, where I lock the door and leave on the lights. My conclusion is that the father is a very mean spirit that constantly torments my brothers, as our rooms overlook the backyard. But the little girl watches over my sisters, which have bedrooms overlooking the girl's tree in front. My sisters are always telling stories of how they sometimes hear laughter from the front yard on quiet days. Our dogs absolutely love the front yard tree, but refuse to even go near the backyard. In fact, none of us like going deep into the backyard because it has a vibe about it that deters anyone and anything. It is strong and definitely there. It's far-fetched, I know, but what happened wasn't a coincidence in my mind. Something physical affected me, and you'd have to be a blind quadriplegic to not notice the signs I experienced. I lived in a haunted house for over 2 decades. The house was built in the early 1700s. It was a beautiful, rambling old house with a big garden, outbuildings, 5 bedrooms, and working fireplaces. My parents, my 3 siblings, and I were overjoyed to be moving into this spacious house after living in a cramped 2.5-bedroom terrace with no garden. My parents had bought the house for an incredibly low price, even for the 90s. It was cheap. I do wonder now if it was something to do with the hauntings. It wasn't before long that we realized we weren't the only residents. A few days after we moved in, my mum was downstairs in the long hallway which ran the length of the house from the front door to the kitchen, past the wide old staircase, as she watched this form of a shadow that seemed to be dressed in Jacobean clothing based on the silhouette, walk along the wall and then disappear into the wall by the stairs, as if he had walked through a door that wasn't there. But that was only the start. We quickly got used to seeing and hearing things that weren't there. We'd constantly see black shapes swiftly moving out of the corner of our eyes. When we'd turn to look, there'd be no one there. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, we would often hear voices talking softly at the base of the stairs. It sounded like 3 or 4 men murmuring to each other, like a group of people planning something. But if we went to the stairs to listen, the voices abruptly stopped. Now bear in mind, this was a detached house with thick, solid walls, and only a quiet couple for neighbors. We called the voices the murmuring men, and grew quite fond of them. My brother liked to stay up late and play video games in his room, between the hours of 2 to 4 a.m. He would often see a woman standing in his bedroom. She was wearing an apron over a Victorian dress. He told us about it, and we all agreed it was weird. Later, when we were having the house renovated, we discovered old servant bells in his room. So perhaps she had been a servant and was checking the young master to see if he wanted anything. As well as seeing and hearing things, there were other indications that we weren't alone. Things would go missing, like objects you'd swear you'd left on the side. We'd all look high and low with no sign of whatever it was, then later that same object would turn up in an incredibly unlikely place, like on top of a wardrobe or somewhere that had already been searched. We even joked that the house had taken it, and sometimes exasperated, my mum would yell, "Come on, house, this isn't funny, give it back," which usually resulted in it showing up a day or so later. But despite these ghostly goings-on, it was a very cozy home. Everyone who visited it noted how welcoming and open the house felt. After my parents divorced, that changed. My mother continued to live in the house with us kids and made some adjustments so that she could put it on the market. I don't know if that alone shook the spirits up, or whether it was because we were all sad and depressed following the divorce, and those emotions were feeding things, but the atmosphere in the house changed completely. It grew heavy and oppressive. You would feel like someone was watching you in the hallway, and none of us kids would go upstairs at night alone. We'd wait and go together. You just did not want to be alone in the hallway or on the stairs. That feeling that something was right behind you was so intense. My sister had to go downstairs alone at one point, and she was walking back to the stairs and heard booted footsteps walking behind her. She shut her eyes and ran back upstairs as quickly as she could. One afternoon, I was in my room reading, and I suddenly heard a woman sobbing loudly. She sounded like her heart was broken. I thought it must be my mom or perhaps my sister, so I ran out onto the landing and called out, "Mum? Sis? What is it?" There was no one there. The noise stopped. I ran downstairs and my mum and sister were sitting, chatting happily in the kitchen. They were fine. They hadn't heard a thing. 6 months later, my brother and sister heard the same woman crying, and my brother thought he'd seen what looked like a swish of dark blue skirt on the landing, but he couldn't be sure. My mum came upstairs one night to her bedroom and found every item on her dressing table had been pushed to the floor as if someone had swept it off. We'd all been downstairs, and her window was closed. Finally, late one evening, my sister was doing the washing up in the kitchen. The sink was in front of a large swash window. The glass in the windows is old. I don't know if it's as old as the house, but it's thick and very wavy and distorts the reflection in them. As she was washing up, she felt the presence of someone in the room with her, someone taller than her standing behind her. She thought it must be one of our brothers. She looked up to see a tall reflection in the window. She turned around to speak to them and no one was there. My mum called the local vicar and he came round with a specialist colleague and blessed the house. They sprinkled holy water and said prayers and it definitely seemed to help. The house felt lighter and we didn't see or hear anything else. My mum sold the house and at the same time I left home and moved into my own home. Someone else lives there now, and I often wonder if the spirits have come out again to see the new owners. First, some background on me, as to establish some basic human credibility before I recount the events that have caused me immense anxiety and depression. I am a 21-year-old male student at Long Beach State, looking to graduate in political science this coming spring. I am also an alumni member of a fraternity on campus. I don't do drugs, and during the course of these events I used marijuana once. In mid-January 2011, my best friend Ryan, fraternity pledge brother, and I looked to move out of the frat house in hopings of bringing some form of normalcy back to our lives. We found an apartment for rent in our price range, $1,200 for a 2-bedroom in downtown Long Beach, so we followed up and made it happen. The day after we moved in, something strange occurred. I went to take my second shower since moving in, and 5 minutes into it was greeted by my neighbor from downstairs complaining that massive amounts of water were leaking into her unit from ours. I checked the water heater and found water gushing from an emergency release valve on the top, which is never supposed to be opened. A few weeks later, in late February, I come home from my crappy job at the CSULB bookstore and find my roommate locked out on our second-story balcony. He knocks on the glass door and I let him in. I think it's hilarious and ask him how long he was locked out for. Turns out he was locked out for 6 hours. Because his right arm was in a splint from shoulder surgery, he wasn't able to climb down. He also didn't have his cell phone. He told me he swore the door was unlocked when he went out for a cigarette. We agreed it was kind of strange, but laughed about him being stuck out there for 6 hours. A few days later, Ryan offered me a bowl to celebrate our new lives away from the frat house. I don't often smoke, but decided it would be fun. I go to bed 45 minutes later, and out of nowhere I am at the most terrified I've ever been in my life. I felt a strange sensation and I have the overwhelming feeling that there was some manifestation of negative energy in my room. I was hearing thoughts that weren't mine, and they were unpleasant. My closed door was bouncing back and forth, so I closed my windows and it continued. I frantically grabbed my phone from the windowsill to text Ryan in the next room. My phone shows one new text, so I click the message box but there's no new message. Convenient time for an iPhone glitch, right? Ryan tells me that I need to calm down and go to bed. The next morning I wake up and convince myself that it was all the result of smoking that bowl and go about as usual. A few weeks went by before one day when I go to work and get a text from Ryan saying that he's locked out again. So I leave work early to get home and let him in. When I got home and let him in, he was a little freaked out. He told me this time he left the door cracked open a few inches and that it slammed shut on him on its own and latched right after. To latch this heavy glass sliding door, you must push the lock up against gravity. We were both pretty disturbed, but for the next few weeks we went about our lives. On March 15th, 2011, I went home after my classes and discovered Ryan's room completely torn apart. It looked like the place had been ransacked. There were clothes everywhere, items knocked over, and his heavy wooden desk had been completely knocked over and the pencil tray had been pulled out all the way and dumped. It looked like a tornado had come through. I looked through the glass door and see Ryan locked out on the balcony, and he starts banging on the glass. "Chris, let me in, man, hurry up." I open the door for him, and the first thing he says to me is, "Bro, all of this stuff happened while I was out there, and I watched my room get completely torn apart by some invisible force for half an hour." He swears that he went out for a smoke, and that this time he left the door halfway open when he hears the door begin to slide shut on its own. He grabs it as quick as he can and catches it before it closes, but the force of the door was too strong and actually pulled him with it. Ryan swears that he smoked his way through a pack of cigarettes as he watched his room be ransacked by some invisible force. I was freaked the hell out and wanted nothing more than to get the hell out of there and never return. I told Ryan I thought that maybe we should get out of the apartment for a while, but he just wanted to clean his room and ignore it. I couch surfed for about a week before regaining the courage to go back and face this thing. The weeks and months that followed were among the worst of my life. Any peace of mind that I had in my own bedroom was lost. When I wanted to fall asleep, strange things would start to happen. My closed door would start to shake back and forth, and occasionally I would hear a violent bang on the door. It got to the point where I would put my shoes up against the door to stop it from banging back and forth, and then one morning I woke up and found that one of those shoes had been moved to the other side of the room. Ryan would go home to San Diego on the weekends, which meant that I was often alone. I would hear footsteps on my carpet next to me as I tried to fall asleep regularly, and I would sense overwhelming negative energy. In short, when it was around our apartment, I could feel it. I would get goosebumps out of nowhere and could just sense it. It was a very strange sensation, and I'm afraid I can't effectively describe it to you. My sleeping habits deteriorated and my grades began to drop like stones. We didn't know how to deal with it, so we started to ignore it. But I can tell you that it was very difficult to ignore. I found that it was nearly impossible for me to fall asleep before 2 a.m., no matter how hard I tried. Something would always keep me up. The growling sound was the worst. It was low-pitched and extremely creepy. For a while I thought it was an aeroplane, but after going outside and not being able to hear the sound, I concluded that the source was indeed inside the apartment. I'm having trouble piecing the rest of the events in order, so I would just list some of the creepy stuff that happened. During the day in mid-April, Ryan's girlfriend Taylor came over. We were trying to put a movie in the Xbox when the power went out. To our surprise, the power outage was restricted to our 2 bedrooms and not the rest of the apartment. Strange. So we decided to play Uno on the carpet in the main room. While playing, we all 3 heard the sound of something sliding across our tile countertop in the kitchen. I go to investigate and find that it was their bottle of Andre champagne. Classy, I know. A few weeks ago, days before we broke our lease and moved out, I was home alone again and in my room on Reddit. I look across the room at my MacBook charger and notice that it was moving on its own, back and forth and making strange shapes like it was alive. I left the room and went into the kitchen. I opened the cupboard and discovered that my unopened box of honey bunches of oats, bomb I know, had been torn open and the bag had been pulled out at a very strange angle. I decided to leave and spend the night at the fraternity house. I have many more accounts of strange events that occurred while living there. It certainly was a creepy experience. I have 3 stories to share. My mum grew up in a house who had a lady fall down the stairs and die. She told me that they were all having dinner at the table, and in the middle was this little table where the top spun. It had sugar, salt, pepper, napkins, toothpicks and stuff, and it started spinning with nobody touching it. They all saw it. On another occasion, my other grandparents would hear things in the attic, like conversations. There were music boxes that would play, and based on some comical and unharmed things, I learnt after my grandma passed. I am confident I didn't hear about everything. They had a house blessed by a priest, and after that never heard anything again. The third story. In my old house, there was a chain lock on the front door. The chain part was picked up and dropped. I didn't see the picked up part, but heard and saw it swinging. Had a buddy with me on the couch. His exact response was, "What the actual hell?" Another time I was on the couch, my son sleeping upstairs, wife was at bingo. We're not 75 years old, by the way, and heard whispering at the top of the steps. I immediately jumped up thinking it was him. It wasn't. We went upstairs and he was in the same position I left him. Two others where my son used to tell me there was a man in the basement. And then, looking up at the stairs one time, he saw a pair of black shoes sticking out from around the corner. Both of these were at an age where the kids speak so matter-of-factly, and it just makes it creepier. I have a few haunted house stories to share. My late mother firmly believed my childhood house was haunted. Apparently before I was born and my parents bought the house, there was a fire in the attic that caused a teen boy to die from smoke inhalation in his sleep. This is why my parents got the house for a good price. Growing up, my mum claimed to be sensitive, and though I dismissed her a lot, there are still a few things I can't explain. My mum had a small knick-knack table in the living room. Once, rounding a corner, she lightly touched a snow globe on the table absent-mindedly, and the snow globe exploded. Not broke, not fell, not cracked, exploded. There were tiny shards of glass all over the carpet. I saw the whole thing happen as I was sitting in the room, and my mum and I instantly locked eyes. While one of these incidents are probably just human error, one time sticks out. We were sitting on the couch watching TV, flicking between two channels to avoid commercials, when suddenly the remote was gone. We tore the house apart for almost 2 hours and found it in the back of the bottom cupboard behind the garbage can. One we rarely use. We always joked that we had a poltergeist hiding the TV remote on us. One time there were no indoor cats and I was sleeping. I distinctly felt cat paws climbing up my leg and settling down. I was half asleep and didn't even think about not having a cat at the time. Only in the morning did I realize, because it felt real, as any earthly sensation. There were also light bulbs shattering and flicking and popping when my mother was nearby. Probably a coincidence most of the time, but it got to the point where my dad kept backups in plenty, and it was somehow always her that it happened around. This also became a family joke, to the point where my mum would wiggle her fingers at us and swear she was a witch. In the attic we also heard noises. There were the usual moans and groans a house will make, but the sound of feet climbing a metal ladder are very specific sounds that would happen on odd occasions at 3 a.m. My dad would be on night shift and my mum slept on the main floor, so in my tiny bungalow it was pretty obvious who was where. The door to my room was under the ladder to the attic, and I used to jump the 3 steps in a hurry because I always got the creepiest feeling under the ladder. Some nights I slept with my mum until I was 17 if I heard the noise. My mum claimed she saw things, but I never did, so I can't confirm anything. She has since passed and promised that she would always haunt me. So far no sign of her, so I'm a little disappointed. Still waiting for you to hide the remote on me, Mum. By nature, I am a jumpy person, and even hearing a floorboard creak causes me to jump out of my skin. I'm here to share a story. To provide some background, I used to work at a Victorian mansion in my hometown during my senior year of high school up until I left for my first year of university. I was a tour guide there, and because of this I was kind of allowed to just explore the home during my free time between tours. This mansion, which is known for its eccentric owner and is apparently haunted according to local urban legend, is big. Big isn't really the right word to describe it. As a home, it's huge. Its layout is confusing, which lends itself to the overall creepy vibe that the house just gives off. The house is allegedly haunted by its owner, and I'm happy to confirm or deny which house it is if people would like that sort of thing, as it's a well-known tourist attraction from where I'm from. There's a certain time of year running from June to mid-July where the house is generally more active. It is generally accepted by tour guides, as we were the ones spending the most time in the house out of all of the employees. But there are far more sightings and paranormal experiences that would occur during this time of year. Our running theory is that these weeks were the time in which the owner's daughter had been alive, before dying 6 weeks after birth. The death was what really started the owner's spiral into what many would consider to be hysteria or craziness. This happened in late July of 2018, if I remember right. It had been a slow day, especially slow for the summer months, where waves of tourists would come tour the home. During slower times, tour guides are sent to the home to clean, generally dusting, washing windows or sweeping, simple tasks to help maintain the house. I, along with one of my co-workers, was cleaning in the owner's main bedroom. Us tour guides would refer to this room as the dead room, as this was in fact the room that the owner died in. This wasn't something we would use around guests, as this would probably freak out the ones that weren't fans of paranormal activity, as we had lots of guests that were fascinated with the architecture, or were just there because Yelp said it was a fun tour. At this time, my co-worker was fairly new to the job, and seeing that I was one of the more senior tour guides with a year underneath my belt, I was pointing out things in the room to her. One thing in particular that I pointed out was a scent sachet that was placed in a period picture on the bedside table. It was supposed to have a floral scent of some kind, but was not particularly strong, so most guests likely wouldn't be able to notice any difference it could possibly make. After doing so, I decided to actually do my job and clean. I was dusting the window frames and my co-worker was inspecting the chest of drawers. For reference, this is across the room from where I pointed out the scent sachet to her just minutes before. While she was seeing if the various drawers in this antique piece of furniture would open, she noticed that the scent sachet would possibly be more effective on this side of the room, as this was the side of the room where guests would enter on the tour. There were 4 drawers on each side of the chest of drawers, and she finally got to the bottom one. And at the time we were about 3 or 4 feet apart, our backs to each other, and my co-worker said in passing, "I'm sorry, Mom," to the home's deceased owner, as there was a possibility that this piece was original to the house. We are unsure, as all of the furniture was sold off shortly after the owner's death in private auction. As she stood up, there all of a sudden was a strong scent of roses, as if someone was shoving a bouquet right in your face, coming from right between where we were standing. I remember feeling this wave of panic immediately wash over me, as I turned to look at my co-worker and asked her if she smelt it too. She said yes, and that she was certain we weren't alone anymore. After a long second of us just looking at each other, the 2 of us bolted from the room, incredibly spooked by this very in-your-face moment, and I have no way to explain it since, and the smell of roses never fails to cause a shiver to run down my spine. When I was still 14, I decided to sleep at the sister of my grandma's house with my cousin. They were living in a house where my grandfather exactly died due to a heart attack, and I was really creeped out whenever I thought about it, especially that there were pictures hanging on the walls, usually pictures of my other relatives who had already passed. I suddenly awoke at 4 a.m. because I needed to pee. My grandmother tried to convince me that I should pee in the arenola, also known as a chamber pot, but in the Philippines we call it arenola. It is used whenever you need to go but can't be asked to use the bathroom. In that case I refused because I didn't want to pee there, so I just had to go outside. Before I could get to the bathroom there's a mini hallway, and at the right side there's a door that would lead me outside. When I knew that was open, I was okay with it, until I saw a woman wearing a white dress floating beside a tree in front of me. I had to look at it closely as I blinked a few times, making sure if I was actually seeing it. She also had really long hair, and I couldn't even see her face. I got really scared because it's like she was walking or floating towards me. I nipped into the bathroom quickly and did my thing. I didn't close the bathroom door fully since I planned to run out as quickly as I could after. I even managed to flush the toilet, even though I was petrified at what I saw. And after turning the lights off, I ran through the hallway and never looked back. After that encounter, I couldn't sleep. It was creepy as well, since there were numerous statues of saints hanging out on the top of their drawer. I felt like they were watching me closely, and it really didn't help me sleep. I never slept at their house again after that. I'm just gonna have all the moments my entire family had at our old house. Some background. There was this river behind our house that was more of an irrigation canal than a river, but they had to block it off on both sides with a fence, because many people died in that river, which might explain everything that happened. I was around 4 to 6 when we lived in that house. Our cat was meowing at the door, and my father opened it up to find a completely crushed dead snake near our cat, like it was killed by a tire. So, when he came back with a big bag to pick it up, the snake sat up and hissed at him. The TV would also turn on completely by itself when no one was around. Our bathroom door could be blocked if someone opened a drawer, but the drawer would open up even though there was no one in the bathroom capable of opening it, as the door opened inwards. My older sister, who was between 8 and 12, had many freakouts because she kept seeing a woman in a red dress, watching her. My older brother, between the ages of 6 and 10, swore he saw an old man in a suit. My ma and pa would also hear me and my younger brother talking to someone in our room over the baby monitor, and at first they didn't care because they thought it was my oldest brother just saying hello to his toddler siblings, until one night my dad finally got pissed, and their door was right across from ours, so in one quick motion he got out of bed and swung it open to yell at our brother for not letting us sleep. And when he opened the door, my younger brother and I were the only ones in the room, staring into our closet and talking to it. On another occasion, I was downstairs watching TV. My baby brother was taking a nap, and I looked at the stairs, and there he was, staring at me. So I thought I'd be a good brother and get him back to bed, but as I went to get him, he ran up the stairs and I chased after. He ran into our room and closed the door, and just as I was about to open the door, 2 doors down, my baby brother comes out from the bathroom wearing a completely different set of pajamas. When I was 12, I moved into a house in the northern suburbs of Melbourne with my mum, brother and sister. When we moved in, nothing out of the ordinary happened, until around 1.5 years into our stay. Most of the incidents would happen to everyone else in the house, but nothing too significant would happen to me. I'll start with my experiences first. Whenever I was on the computer in my brother's room at one side of the house, I would always hear footsteps from my mother's bedroom on the opposite side of the house. Always when I was home alone. I usually just shrugged it off as the neighbors walked around the house and the sound echoed into our house. Another time I had a friend over for a sleepover party on a Friday night. In the morning we were playing with wrestling figures in the play space between the drinking area and the living room. While playing, I saw from the corner of my eye this wispy kind of shape, like a human, walk behind me. When I looked, there was nothing there. My friend was facing me and said, "Did you see that?" "No," he said. One more thing that happened to me was when we were in the final week of moving house, we had a lot of boxes in the living room. One night, I was sleeping with my door open, and I could hear the boxes sliding around the floor and crashing into each other. My first initial thought was robbers were in the house. I turned over in bed to face the wall, then everything went dead, silent, and I was absolutely horrified. Now, more creepy things happened to my siblings and my mother. My mother used to hear a painting always fall off in the hallway, but it would fall and land upright leaning against the wall. At night, she had her closet open, and a coat hanger would often fly out the closet onto the floor. She once saw the imprint of someone sitting on her bed once, and she told me that when she was walking down the hallway, she felt as if someone was right behind her. My brother had a lot of weird things happen too. His room was located towards the back of the house next to the kitchen. At around 5 a.m. in the morning, he would hear the pots and pans moving around. He would ask my mother why her partner was up so early making noises. She would say, "He wasn't even here last night or this morning." Once when he had a friend over, they were in his room, when they saw, from under his door, the hallway light turn on. He thought someone was going to the toilet, as he saw a shadow under the door as if someone had walked past. I was not home at the time, neither was my sister, and my mother wouldn't have gone to the opposite side of the house because she had an ensuite of her own. He opened the door. No one was there. My sister's experiences seemed to be the most frightening though. My mother once told her to brush her teeth in her bathroom, so my sister walked into the room, then walked out, wide-eyed, and said to my mum, "There's someone sitting on your bed." My mother said she was terrified, but had to be brave and say, "I'll come with you, it's okay." Even creepier, my sister told me that she used to see an extremely tall black figure stand outside her doorway a couple of nights, and then some nights it was inside of her room. It would just stand there and look at her. When we finally moved, my mother said to the real estate agent that she thinks the house might have been haunted. But upon moving, she got in contact again with the agent, and apparently there have been no reports of hauntings at all. Yet. Or so she says. When I was going to college in Cooksville, Tennessee, I got to know some of the local kids, which actually meant kids from nearby rural areas and towns, with barely enough people to be considered population by any definition. Areas that you hear about, and still do, a double take at when hearing that it's an actual location or county, even when you've lived your entire life nearby. So of course, these kids knew every local ghost/creepy/urban legend, and they would mess around with us, and the stories would get passed down to children as sorts of tales. Then I had to go to the worst field trip in the middle of the night, because they wanted to prove a story. I just wanted to say that what they were speaking was absolute nonsense, and that their stories were lies. So here's a story. During the Civil War, in order to make money, and apparently live, a father ran a brothel while forcing his 5 or so daughters into prostitution. When one got pregnant, he would kill the baby on delivery and burn it to ash in a furnace. This went on for years until the locals found out and hung the man from a tree in his front yard, while the daughters committed suicide after being subjected to that for years. They were all apparently buried on the property behind the house where it happened. Now here's the messed up part. For whatever damn reason, the relatives who inherited the house never tore it down, sorted the land, and all of that stuff. The house, creepily enough, maintained itself according to locals. No one ever touched it, went in it, or went near it. When locals asked the relatives, they just said it was too evil to burn. So besides my brain going, "Did you try gasoline?" when I heard this part, I called bull. So no one wants anything to do with it. I get taken for a ride, a long, convoluted ride down the side and country roads where you are blessed if it has a street marker, and luckily if it's paved. All the way out to this house in the dead of night. At this point, I had seen some stuff from my first time in the woods. A little older, a little wiser, and I trusted my gut more. So when I say that on a bright, clear full moon night, that somehow this little house sucked the light out of the air, like someone had permanently cel-shaded this area to be shadowed, please believe me when I say that even 2 cars with brights on barely made a ripple in the darkness when we pointed the lights towards this place. Barely stepping out of the car onto the property was enough for me to get back into the car and not leave it again. The locals were spooked too, since apparently they had only heard how to get here. All I can remember was the house kind of flicked in the shadows, not like a light bulb, but kind of like a firefly, barely noticeable and easily missed, like breathing, except the shadows were expanding and contracting around it. Most of all, it felt wrong, like every cliché you've ever heard about supernatural stuff gone wild. It felt like it had a physical presence and was pissed at you specifically, kind of like that feeling you get right before something bad happens on steroids. Everyone felt that. And after 5 or so minutes of just staring at it, we finally turned back to the dorms, and I go grab a sandwich. An ex of mine had a young son who had a tendency to sit up at night and talk to his friends. No biggie, kids in their imaginations, right? One day the girlfriend and I ordered a pizza, set up a movie, and get the kid washed for bed. He's in his bath and I asked if he was ready to go to sleep, and he said it'd be lonely. I asked why if he said he had his friends. Well, fast forward 30 minutes later, I kill the lights to his bedroom and say goodnight. And he turns to me with the biggest grin ever and says, "He's here, he's back." That's when the doorbell rang, and I just about crapped myself. Turns out it was just the pizza guy. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm just going to say the obvious. If you aren't subscribed, are not, and watch these videos frequently, as a fair percentage of you do, I recommend you subscribe and stick around. It's free, and there's new content every night. So, more reasons to stick around. I'd like to thank my members and patrons whose names are on screen for your continued support. It really makes a huge difference, more than you can imagine, to help keep the channel running. So, thank you all. I love haunted houses. A few of these stories, I think 2 or 3, are some of the original ones that I did in my first ever videos. And I recently did a huge what's the word? I basically went back to find all the old stories I did because I wanted to remaster them, because some of them are really good, like a few of these ones I thought were excellent. And yeah, I just wanted to redo them because they haven't been heard on this channel for such a long time, and most likely most of you had never heard them before. So I'm glad I can revisit some old stories, which I think are still fun. So I hope you liked today's video. You can drop likes and leave comments. That's always appreciated too. I'm going to go now. So stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.